At 0317 hours on a moonless Tuesday in the Strait of Hormuz, the water was flat, black, and completely silent. The kind of silence that experienced sailors have learned to distrust. There was no wind. The surface of the Gulf looked like polished obsidian in every direction, broken only by the faint radar return of the Omani coastline 14 miles to the south and the steady amber glow of a supertanker holding anchorage position 6 miles off the port beam. USS Gettysburg, a Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser displacing 9,800 tons, was holding position 4.2 nautical miles northeast of the Iranian coastline. Engines at idle, every sensor array humming at full capacity. The air temperature sat at 91 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity was suffocating. On the bridge, the officer of the watch, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Okafor, had already gone through 2 bottles of water and was beginning her 3rd slow circuit of the bridge wing, watching the dark horizon the way only someone who already knows something is coming watches it, not searching, just waiting. Below deck, Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Webb was on his 3rd cup of coffee in 2 hours, staring at a sonar display that had been showing nothing but ocean floor sediment for the last 4 hours and 17 minutes. Then the display changed. I'm your host at World Defense, the channel where we pull back the curtain on the operations that shape the balance of power across the world's most dangerous waterways. What unfolded over the next 22 minutes wasn't just a tactical response. It was the most concentrated and precisely executed naval retaliation in the Persian Gulf since Operation Praying Mantis, and most of the world never heard a single word about it. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, known as the IRGCN, had been planning this operation for 61 days. Iranian naval planners operating out of Bandar Abbas had identified what they believed was a structural weakness in the patrol rotation of the USS Gettysburg and her escort, Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Nitsa. Every 72 hours, the 2 vessels shifted their patrol corridor approximately 3.8 nautical miles to the southeast, creating a brief window when their combined sonar coverage left a measurable gap near the shallow shelf running along the Keshem Island coastline. Iranian analysts had mapped this gap using a combination of passive acoustic monitoring stations embedded along the seafloor and signals intelligence gathered over a 6-month observation window. They were confident in their data. They had run the numbers repeatedly, and the conclusion was always the same. The gap was real, it was predictable, and it was exploitable. The weapon they chose was not a missile, it was not a drone. It was something far older, far cheaper, and in the shallow choke points of the Persian Gulf, potentially far more lethal. A remotely activated bottom mine, specifically an Iranian manufactured copy of the Soviet U-GMT-1 series, modified with a domestically produced pressure acoustic detonation system. The device weighed 340 kilograms. Its shaped charge was calculated to punch through the hull of any surface combatant displacing under 10,000 tons. The Gettysburg displaced 9,800. The margin in the Iranian planners' calculations was exactly 200 tons, and they considered it sufficient. The mine had been placed 19 days earlier by a semi-submersible vessel operating under acoustic silence at 0200 hours local time, positioned at a depth of 22 meters directly inside the projected path of the American ships. The crew of that semi-submersible consisted of 4 divers and 2 operators. They had trained for this specific mission for 11 weeks at a classified facility near Jask on the Gulf of Oman. They had run the full insertion route in simulation 43 times. They had practiced the mine placement procedure in a training pool under blackout conditions until the entire sequence was muscle memory. They believed the placement was flawless. They returned to port that morning at 6:30 hours, ate breakfast, and reported a clean operation with 0 detection to their commanding officer, who forwarded the same assessment up the IRGCN chain of command within the hour. By midday, a senior planner at Bandar Abbas headquarters had annotated his operational file with a single phrase that translates roughly as, "The trap is set." What they didn't know was that the USS Gettysburg's Tactical Operations Center had been tracking an anomalous bottom contact at grid reference Whiskey 779er for the past 96 hours. A P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating out of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar had detected a thermal and magnetic signature inconsistent with natural seafloor geology during a routine low-altitude sweep conducted on the same night the mine was placed. The Poseidon was flying at 200 feet above the surface, its sensor suite running a passive magnetic anomaly detection sweep over a corridor the crew had filed as a standard training track. The operator who flagged the contact, aviation electronics technician First Class Dominic Reyes, almost didn't log it. It was subtle, just a variance of 0.3 milligauss above baseline. But the positioning was wrong, directly centered in the deepest part of the American patrol corridor. And Reyes had been doing this long enough to know that the Gulf floor near Keshem Island did not produce ferrous anomalies in open water. He logged it. He tagged it as Priority 2. Within 6 hours, it had been cross-referenced against SOSUS passive sonar data pulled from a network of underwater hydrophone arrays anchored at 4 fixed positions along the Gulf floor. The acoustic signature matched no known geological feature and no cataloged wreck. Its positioning, directly inside the Gettysburg's projected patrol corridor, was not an accident. United States Naval Forces Central Command, operating from their headquarters in Bahrain, issued a quiet alert at 0430 hours the following morning. The Gettysburg was informed on a secured circuit. The patrol route was subtly adjusted, shifted 0.4 nautical miles north of the mine's position, close enough to appear normal on Iranian surveillance imagery, far enough to ensure the weapon's proximity fuse would not trigger. The Americans sailed past it 3 times over 4 days, watching, waiting, and tracking every IRGCN vessel operating within 40 nautical miles. They wanted to know who would come to check on it. Inside the Tactical Operations Center aboard USS Gettysburg, the watch team had maintained what Captain David Horowitz called a cold file on the mine contact for 19 consecutive days. Every officer who rotated onto watch was briefed on it in the first 90 seconds of their handover. Every navigation decision over those 19 days was quietly shaped around it. Course adjustments logged as routine, speed changes attributed to traffic management. Nothing that would suggest to any Iranian observer that the Americans had detected anything at all. The Gettysburg passed within 0.6 nautical miles of the device twice, close enough to appear natural, close enough to register on Iranian surveillance, never close enough to trigger the pressure acoustic fuse. The crew knew it was there. They said nothing on any unencrypted channel. They filed no incident report through standard naval message traffic. They went about their patrols with the specific, deliberate normalcy of people who are very carefully not reacting to something significant. On the 19th night, an IRGCN patrol boat designated Bogey Kilo 4 in the American tactical picture, a 38-meter Siraj-class fast attack craft carrying 4 crew and 1 dedicated remote detonation operator, moved to a position 2.1 nautical miles southeast of the mine site at 0248 hours local time. The vessel's engine signature had been cataloged in the Gettysburg's acoustic library for 11 months. The watch team recognized it the moment it cleared the Keshem Island coastal radar shadow. At 0309 hours, Bogey Kilo 4 reduced speed to 4 knots and held position. The ship was sitting in complete darkness. No navigation lights, all radar emissions suppressed. On the Gettysburg's tactical display, it was a small green icon barely moving against the sea clutter returns. 8 minutes later, at 0317 hours exactly, the vessel transmitted a single 0.3 second burst signal on a frequency previously identified by the NSA as an IRGCN mine activation channel. The transmission was logged, timestamped, and recorded by the Gettysburg's electronic warfare suite in the same instant it was broadcast. The mine detonated. Below deck on the Gettysburg, Petty Officer Webb felt it before he heard it. A deep, rolling compression that traveled upward through 4 decks of steel plating and into his boots. Not a sharp crack, but a sustained pressure wave that lasted almost 2 full seconds. Then every alarm on the ship went off simultaneously. The overhead lights shifted from white to emergency red. Through the deck, he could feel the ship shudder. A slow, sick roll to port that was not the ocean doing it. He was already moving toward his damage control station before the second officer had finished announcing general quarters over the 1MC, 14 seconds from detonation to full damage control team deployment. They had rehearsed it 22 times in the past 6 months. They were ready. The explosion had occurred 18 meters below the surface and 31 meters off the Gettysburg's port beam. The concussive force of 680 kilograms of high explosive in a shaped charge configuration sent a column of water and compressed gas upward with enough energy to buckle 3 sections of port deck plating, shatter every unsecured piece of equipment within the ship's port engineering spaces, and knock 4 sailors off their feet with sufficient violence to produce 2 broken ribs, 1 fractured wrist, and 1 serious concussion. None of the injuries were fatal. All 4 were treated within 7 minutes. The damage control parties had been pre-positioned quietly 2 hours before the Siraj-class boat ever left its dock. The Gettysburg was hit. She was not out of the fight. At 03:18 hours and 44 seconds, Captain Horowitz transmitted a single pre-authorized brevity code to Fleet Command in Bahrain. The code had one meaning: execute. The response package: pre-coordinated, pre-approved through the full chain of command, including authorization from the Secretary of Defense, pre-loaded into the fire control systems of 3 separate vessels, required nothing more. In the Gettysburg's Combat Information Center, 8 officers and 12 enlisted personnel worked in near-complete silence. The target packages had not been assembled in the chaos following the explosion. They had been assembled over 19 days. Every target coordinate, every weapon assignment, every sequencing interval had been entered, verified, and locked. What was happening in that darkened room was not improvisation under fire. It was the completion of a process that had begun the morning Petty Officer Reyes filed his magnetic anomaly report at Al Udeid Air Base. At 03:19 hours exactly, USS Nitsa, holding position 6.7 nautical miles to the northeast, executed a hard turn to bearing 220 and increased to flank speed. Her AN/SPY-1D phased array radar, the centerpiece of the Aegis combat system, was already painting every surface and airborne contact within 200 nautical miles. The Siraj-class patrol boat carrying the mine detonation team was designated Master 1 in the tactical picture. Its crew had 4 minutes and 11 seconds remaining. At 03:20 hours, 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters went to full rotor power and lifted off from the Nitsa's flight deck. Each aircraft carried a crew of 4 and 2 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles on port and starboard pylons. Their tasking was maritime surface strike. Their targets were 2 IRGCN patrol boats, Bogey Kilo 6 and Bogey Kilo 9, that had departed Bandar Abbas Naval Station at 23:40 hours the previous evening and were now holding a loose observation picket 11 nautical miles to the west. Intelligence assessment had identified them as standby vessels tasked with post-strike damage assessment and early warning for the Iranian side of the operation. They were positioned to watch and report back to Bandar Abbas headquarters. They were not expecting what was approaching from the north at 145 knots with engine noise masked below the ambient Gulf wind noise. At 03:21 hours and 19 seconds, the Nitsa's fire control solution for Master 1 was locked and confirmed. Range 8.3 nautical miles. Bearing 214 degrees. Target speed 6 knots. No evasive maneuvering detected. The Bogey Kilo 4 crew had not yet processed that the Americans were responding. The fire control officer stated the solution aloud. The commanding officer gave authorization in under 3 seconds. 2 RGM-84 Harpoon Block 2 anti-ship missiles left their canisters with a double concussive crack, ignited their solid fuel boosters, dropped immediately to wave-skimming altitude, and accelerated to 537 miles per hour on a flat sea-level approach that would provide almost no usable radar warning time to the target vessel. At 03:22 hours and 04 seconds, the USS Gettysburg, still taking on controlled flooding in 2 port engineering compartments, still with damage control parties isolating the breach under emergency lighting, fired 2 BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles from forward VLS cells 3 and 7. The targets were ashore. The IRGCN support complex at Bandar Lenge, 34 nautical miles northwest along the Iranian coast, contained 3 discrete facilities: a mine storage and preparation depot in a reinforced concrete structure, a fast attack boat maintenance and construction facility with 2 Siraj-class hulls in progress, and the signals intelligence relay station that had been the analytical backbone of the entire Iranian surveillance operation for the previous 2 months. All 3 were in the targeting package, each assigned a separate Tomahawk. The weapons climbed to 1,500 feet after launch, oriented northwest, and settled into level cruise at 550 miles per hour. At 0323 hours and 41 seconds, both Harpoons reached Master 1 simultaneously. The first struck the Siraj-class hull amidships at the waterline. The second impacted 0.9 seconds later, 3 meters aft of the first entry point. The combined detonation of 490 pounds of penetrating high explosive produced a fireball that the Gettysburg's bridge watch team could see clearly from 8.3 nautical miles away. A sudden orange column that reflected off the flat black water and then collapsed into rolling secondary smoke. The Siraj-class boat broke into 2 sections within 14 seconds. It sank completely in 31 seconds. Water depth at that position was 43 meters. There were no survivors. At 0324 hours, the lead MH-60R Seahawk acquired bogey Kilo 6 on its forward-looking infrared system from an altitude of 200 feet and a range of 2.3 nautical miles. The Iranian crew had detected an airborne radar contact approximately 2 minutes earlier and were attempting to accelerate and turn to reduce their cross-section. It changed nothing. An AGM-114L Hellfire longbow left the helicopter's port pylon, covered 2.1 nautical miles in 7 seconds, and impacted directly into the patrol boat's pilot house. The vessel lost steering, propulsion, and all power instantaneously. 11 seconds later, a second Hellfire struck the forward fuel storage compartment. The resulting explosion sent fire 60 feet above the waterline and was visible on the NHTSA's bridge camera feed from 11 nautical miles. Bogey Kilo 9 turned immediately and ran at full power on a heading of 285 degrees toward the Iranian coastline. It reached 38 knots before the second MH-60R came off a hard banking turn and acquired a clean firing solution from bearing 340. 1 Hellfire. Direct impact on the engine room. The boat went dead in the water at 0325 hours and 52 seconds, losing all momentum and beginning to list to starboard as seawater entered through the hull rupture. The crew of 6 began abandoning ship into 91-degree water in total darkness. On the tactical display aboard USS NHTSA, the tactical action officer marked the contact destroyed, logged the time to the second, and shifted forward to the next entry in the strike sequence without pause. No celebration, no commentary, just the steady, deliberate professionalism of a crew that had been waiting for exactly this night. At 0327 hours and 09 seconds, the first Tomahawk crossed the Iranian coastline at 550 miles per hour. At 0328 hours and 17 seconds, the weapon struck the mine storage depot at Bandar Lenge. The 1,000-pound unitary warhead penetrated the reinforced concrete roof of the storage structure before its delayed fuse detonated, triggering a cascading series of secondary explosions as stored mine ordnance cooked off, UGMT-1 bodies, detonation assemblies, propellant charges, and stored fuel for the semi-submersible fleet. The detonation chain lasted 4 minutes and 39 seconds. The facility was a total and irreparable loss. At 0329 hours, the second Tomahawk struck the fast attack boat maintenance facility 340 meters to the east, collapsing the primary bay roof onto both Siraj-class hulls under construction and destroying the crane infrastructure used for vessel handling and launch. At 0330 hours and 03 seconds, the third Tomahawk impacted the signals intelligence relay station. The 23-meter antenna array, the associated receiver banks, the hardened communications vault, and the generator building that powered the entire installation ceased to exist in less than 1 second. The relay station had been the nerve center through which 2 months of American patrol pattern intelligence had been compiled, analyzed, and acted upon. Rebuilding it would take years. The institutional knowledge of the analysts who had operated it could not be rebuilt at all. At 0339 hours, Captain Horowitz transmitted the mission complete report to Fleet Command. The engagement had lasted 22 minutes and 16 seconds from mine detonation to the moment the final Tomahawk impacted. The Gettysburg was underway under her own power, making 12 knots on an exit course away from the Iranian coastline, damage control parties still working the port hull breach under emergency lighting. She would require dry dock repairs. She would be back at full operational status and back in the Strait of Hormuz before the IRGCN had finished assessing what had happened to Bandar Linge. 3 IRGCN vessels were destroyed. 1 mine storage facility, 1 boat construction facility, and 1 intelligence installation were neutralized. The mine team that had trained for 11 weeks and waited 19 days was gone. The picket boats were gone. The surveillance infrastructure that had made the entire 61-day planning cycle possible was gone. What this engagement reveals about modern naval warfare is not complicated, but it is absolute. The United States Navy does not simply respond to threats. It identifies them before they are activated, tracks them without revealing that tracking, and constructs comprehensive response packages that are ready to execute before the adversary has finished arming their weapon. The surveillance architecture that feeds American naval decision-making, from orbital satellites to deep-floor hydrophone arrays to the P-8 Poseidon flying sensor runs at wave height in the dark, creates a picture of the battle space so complete that an adversary who believes they are operating covertly is almost certainly being watched, cataloged, and planned against in real time. The second lesson is about the mathematics of deterrence. The IRGCN placed 1 mine against 1 American cruiser. The American response destroyed 3 vessels, leveled 3 facilities, and dismantled an intelligence network representing years of institutional investment. That asymmetry is not accidental. It is the deliberate, calculated signal that defines American naval deterrence in the Persian Gulf. For every action taken against an American warship, the response will not match the action. It will exceed it by a factor that makes repetition strategically incoherent. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It carries 21% of the world's petroleum trade through those 21 miles every single day. Any nation that believes it can use that choke point as a weapon against the United States Navy, with mines, with fast boats running dark at 0300 hours, now has a very specific, very detailed 22-minute case study in what that belief actually costs. The message was not delivered in a diplomatic cable. It was not announced at a press conference. It arrived at 550 miles per hour on a bearing of 315 degrees, and it landed precisely where it was calculated to land. In the Persian Gulf, quiet is never safety. For the IRGCN, that lesson now carries a permanent and specific price tag, measured in ships, in reinforced concrete, in 2 months of surveillance work reduced to rubble, and in the 22 minutes it took the United States Navy to make the final accounting complete.